My life with Eleonora had always felt like a carefully composed symphony, a harmonious blend of shared dreams, comfortable routines, and a love that, I believed, was as steadfast as the mountains I often admired on our weekend getaways. We'd met in college, two aspiring architects drawn together by a shared passion for design and a mutual appreciation for the clean lines and elegant simplicity of Bauhaus architecture. Our relationship, much like our aesthetic preferences, was built on a foundation of order and balance. We married shortly after graduation, secured promising positions at rival firms, a friendly rivalry that fueled our creativity, and settled into a beautifully restored Victorian house in the historic district. Life, from the outside, looked picture-perfect. But lately, a subtle dissonance had crept into our symphony. It was a barely perceptible shift, a note slightly out of tune, yet it resonated with a growing unease within me. Eleonora, once so effusive and engaged, had become increasingly withdrawn. Her laughter, which used to fill our home with warmth, was now a rare and fleeting sound. Our conversations, once vibrant and stimulating, had dwindled into polite exchanges about the weather or the day's headlines. Evenings that were once spent curled up on the sofa, discussing our projects or simply enjoying each other's company, were now marked by a strained silence, broken only by the hum of the television. I tried to rationalize her distance. Perhaps she was stressed at work. The firm she was with had recently taken on a large, demanding project. Or maybe she was simply going through a phase, a period of introspection that would eventually pass. I told myself that I was being overly sensitive, that I was reading too much into her quietness. Yet, the feeling persisted, a nagging sense that something was amiss. It was like a small crack in a perfectly smooth surface, invisible at first glance, but growing larger with each passing day, threatening to shatter the illusion of perfection. I found myself watching her more closely, studying her expressions, searching for a clue, a sign, anything that would explain her change in demeanor. But she remained an enigma, her thoughts and feelings locked away behind a wall of polite indifference. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew so well, was slowly becoming a stranger to me. And the symphony of our life together, once so harmonious, was beginning to sound increasingly discordant. The shift in Eleonora wasn't just emotional. It manifested physically as well. She became meticulous about her appearance, a change that, in itself, wasn't unusual, but the way she went about it felt different. She'd always had a refined sense of style, but now it was as if she was curating a new persona. New clothes appeared in her wardrobe, designer labels I didn't recognize. She spent more time in front of the mirror, experimenting with different hairstyles and makeup. A new, subtle perfume replaced her signature floral scent, something sharper, more provocative. It was as if she was preparing for an event, a performance, but the audience remained unseen, at least to me. Her schedule, too, underwent a transformation. She started working late more frequently, citing urgent deadlines and important client meetings. Business trips, which had been occasional in the past, became a regular occurrence. She was always rushing out the door, a flurry of hurried goodbyes and vague explanations. When I asked about her projects or her colleagues, she became evasive, offering only brief, dismissive answers. It was as if she was deliberately keeping me at arm's length, creating a barrier between us that I couldn't seem to penetrate. One evening, I decided to surprise her at her office. I brought takeout, thinking we could have a late dinner together, a spontaneous gesture to reconnect. When I arrived, her office was dark. I called her cell, but it went straight to voicemail. I waited in the lobby for over an hour, growing increasingly anxious. Finally, I gave up and went home, the uneaten takeout growing cold in my bag. Eleonora arrived home late, her face flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. She offered a perfunctory apology, claiming she'd been in a meeting that ran late. But her explanation felt hollow, rehearsed. I looked at her, searching for the familiar warmth in her eyes, but found only a cool, distant gaze. The thread that held our lives together, once so strong and vibrant, was beginning to unravel, strand by painful strand. I felt a growing sense of dread, a premonition that something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The unseen cracks in our relationship were widening, and I was afraid of what I would find if I dared to look closer. It wasn't a single event, a dramatic confrontation, that shattered the fragile remnants of my trust in Eleonora. It was a collection of small, almost insignificant details, like pieces of a puzzle that, when assembled, painted a devastating picture. The late nights, the unexplained expenses, the subtle changes in her demeanor, these were the individual pieces. But it was the scent that finally brought them together, completing the image of betrayal. It happened after one of her business trips. She returned late, as usual, her apologies perfunctory. I barely registered them. I was growing accustomed to her absences, to the hollow echo of her excuses. But as she brushed past me, a faint, unfamiliar scent lingered in the air. It wasn't her new perfume. This was something different, something musky, distinctly masculine. It clung to her clothes, a phantom presence that whispered of intimacy, of shared moments I wasn't privy to. I tried to dismiss it, to tell myself I was imagining things. But the scent clung to my memory, a constant reminder of my growing suspicions. It became an obsession, a phantom aroma that haunted my waking hours and invaded my dreams. I started paying more attention to the subtle details I had previously overlooked. The way she flinched when I touched her, the averted gaze, the almost imperceptible tremor in her voice when she spoke of her work. Each small detail, each fleeting moment, added fuel to the fire of my suspicion. One evening, while Eleonora was working late, I decided to do something I had never done before. I went through her things. I know it was a breach of privacy, a violation of the trust that was already hanging by a thread. But I couldn't help myself. I had to know. I started with her purse, carefully examining its contents. A receipt for an expensive restaurant I didn't recognize, a business card with a name I didn't know, a small silk handkerchief that didn't belong to me. Each item was a tiny pinprick to my heart, confirming my worst fears. But it was the discovery of a second phone, hidden in a small compartment of her bag, that finally broke me. It was locked, of course, but the mere existence of it was a testament to her deception. It was a secret she was desperately trying to protect, a secret that I knew with a chilling certainty involved another man. The scent of betrayal was no longer a phantom. It was a tangible presence, suffocating me with its weight. The puzzle was complete, the picture clear. My wife, the woman I had built my life with, was betraying me. And the symphony of our life together was about to come to a screeching, devastating halt. The discovery of the second phone was like a punch to the gut. It was a confirmation of my worst fears, a tangible piece of evidence that shattered any remaining illusions I had about my marriage. I held the phone in my hand, its smooth surface cold against my skin, and felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The scent of betrayal, once a subtle whisper, now filled the room, choking me with its intensity. I couldn't confront Eleonora immediately. I needed time to process the information, to formulate a plan. I put the phone back in her purse, carefully replacing everything as I had found it. Then, I went for a walk, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere of our home. I walked for hours, the city lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors. The streets were crowded, but I felt utterly alone. The noise and bustle around me seemed distant, muffled, as if I were in a dream. I couldn't shake the image of the phone, the symbol of Eleonora's deception. It was a constant presence in my mind, a dark shadow that followed me wherever I went. When I finally returned home, it was late. Eleonora was asleep, her face pale and serene in the dim light. I stood by the bed, watching her, a maelstrom of emotions raging within me. Anger, hurt, betrayal, confusion. They swirled together, threatening to consume me. I woke her gently. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Mark," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "What's wrong?" "We need to talk," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. She sat up, her eyes widening with alarm. "What is it? What's happened?" I held up the phone. "This," I said, my voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "This is what happened." The color drained from her face. She stared at the phone, her lips moving soundlessly. For a moment, there was only silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that filled the room. Then, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I can explain. Explain what? I asked, my voice rising. Explain why you've been lying to me? Explain why you have a secret phone. Explain why you reek of another man's cologne. The words tumbled out of me, fueled by months of suppressed suspicion and pain. Eleonora shrank back, her eyes filled with fear. She tried to speak, but I cut her off. Don't bother with the excuses, I said, my voice cold and hard. I don't want to hear them. I just want to know one thing. Who is he? She hesitated, her gaze flickering away from mine. His name is Julian, she finally said, her voice barely audible. Julian. The name echoed in my mind. A stranger who had invaded my life, shattered my marriage, and stolen my wife. I felt a surge of rage, a primal urge to lash out, to hurt her as she had hurt me. But I held myself back. This wasn't the time for violence. This was the time for answers. How long? I asked, my voice tight with anger. A few months, she whispered, her eyes downcast. A few months, I repeated, incredulous. You've been lying to me, betraying me, for months? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Mark, she sobbed. I never meant to hurt you. Her apology was meaningless. Couldn't erase the pain, the betrayal, the sense of utter devastation that consumed me. I looked at her, the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my life, and saw a stranger. The symphony of our life together had reached its final, tragic movement. And there was no encore. The confrontation with Eleonora left me feeling hollowed out, like a tree struck by lightning, its core burned to ash. The initial rage had subsided, replaced by a numbing sense of emptiness. The woman I loved, the woman I had built my life with, was gone. In her place stood a stranger, someone I barely recognized. I spent the rest of the night in the guest room, unable to bear the thought of sharing a bed with her. Sleep was a distant impossibility. Every time I closed my eyes, images of Eleonora and Julian flashed through my mind, their laughter echoing in the silence of the night. I tossed and turned, the sheets tangled around my legs, a physical manifestation of the turmoil within me. The morning arrived, gray and bleak, mirroring my emotional state. Eleonora was gone. She had left a note on the kitchen counter, a hastily scrawled apology, expressing her regret and asking for forgiveness. But her words were hollow, devoid of any real meaning. They couldn't erase the pain, the betrayal, the sense of utter devastation that consumed me. I went through the motions of my day like an automaton. I showered, dressed, and went to work, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't focus on my tasks, couldn't engage in conversations with my colleagues. All I could think about was Eleonora, Julian, and the life that had been stolen from me. I returned home to an empty house. Eleonora's things were gone. She had taken her clothes, her toiletries, her favorite books. It was as if she had never existed, as if the past 10 years of my life had been a dream. The house felt eerily silent, the silence amplifying the emptiness within me. I wandered through the rooms, touching the furniture, the walls, the objects that held memories of our life together. The dining table where we had shared countless meals, the sofa where we had curled up on countless evenings, the bed where we had made love, where we had whispered secrets, where we had dreamed of a future that would never be. Each object was a reminder of what I had lost, of the life that had been shattered. I spent the next few days in a daze, moving through life like a ghost. I barely ate, barely slept. I went to work, but my heart wasn't in it. I interacted with people, but my words felt hollow, my smiles forced. I was a shell of my former self, a hollow shell inhabited by grief and despair. The symphony of my life had been silenced, replaced by a deafening silence that threatened to swallow me whole. I was lost, adrift in a sea of pain, with no land in sight. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to find my way back. The initial shock of Eleanora's departure gradually gave way to a gnawing anger, a burning resentment that consumed me from the inside out. The emptiness I had felt transformed into a seething rage, a desire for retribution. I couldn't accept that she had simply walked away, leaving me to pick up the pieces of our shattered life. I wanted her to hurt as I was hurting, to feel the same pain, the same betrayal, the same sense of utter devastation. I started drinking heavily, seeking solace in the numbing embrace of alcohol. The days blurred into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun and the empty bottles that accumulated in my apartment. I neglected my work, my appearance, my health. I became a recluse, withdrawing from the world, isolating myself from friends and family. My once-ordered life descended into chaos. The apartment, once a haven of peace and tranquility, became a reflection of my inner turmoil. Dirty dishes piled up in the sink, clothes lay scattered on the floor, and empty pizza boxes littered the coffee table. The symphony of my life, once so carefully orchestrated, had devolved into a cacophony of noise and dissonance. I spent hours brooding, replaying the events of the past few months in my mind, searching for answers, for explanations, for someone to blame. I obsessed over Eleanora and Julian, imagining their life together, their laughter, their intimacy. The images haunted me, fueling my anger, my resentment, my desire for revenge. I started following them. At first, it was just a way to keep tabs on them, to satisfy my curiosity. I would drive by their apartment building, watch them come and go, observe their interactions. But it soon became an obsession, a compulsion I couldn't control. I would spend hours parked across the street, watching them through the tinted windows of my car, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger, jealousy, and despair. I learned their routines, their habits, their favorite haunts. I knew where they went for coffee, where they shopped for groceries, where they went for their evening walks. I became a shadow, lurking in the periphery of their lives, unseen, unheard, but always present. The descent into darkness was gradual, insidious. It started with a desire for justice, a need to make things right. But it quickly spiraled out of control, fueled by alcohol, anger, and a growing sense of despair. I was losing myself, becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone I didn't want to be. But I couldn't stop. The thirst for revenge had taken hold, and it wouldn't let go. My life had become a twisted game of cat and mouse. By day, I went through the motions of my work, a hollow shell of my former self. But by night, I was a predator, stalking my prey, consumed by a single-minded obsession. Eleanora and Julian were no longer just people to me. They were symbols of my pain, my betrayal, my loss. They were the embodiment of everything that had gone wrong in my life. I meticulously documented their every move. I took photographs, recorded videos, compiled a detailed dossier of their lives. I knew their schedules, their habits, their routines. I knew what they ate for breakfast, what movies they watched, what time they went to bed. I knew them better than they knew themselves. My apartment became a shrine to my obsession. The walls were covered in photographs, maps, and timelines. Strings connected different locations, creating a web of their movements. Notes scribbled on post-it notes detailed their conversations, their arguments, their intimate moments. It was a chaotic, disturbing display, a testament to the darkness that had consumed me. I spent hours poring over the evidence, analyzing every detail, searching for patterns, for weaknesses, for opportunities. I was like a detective, piecing together a puzzle, determined to solve the mystery of their betrayal. But unlike a detective, my goal wasn't to bring them to justice. My goal was to destroy them. The obsession took over my life. I neglected my work, my friends, my family. I stopped taking care of myself. My apartment became a mess, my clothes unwashed, my hair unkempt. I was a shadow of my former self, a ghost haunting the streets of the city. But I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was my obsession. It was the only thing that gave my life meaning, the only thing that kept me going. It was a dark, twisted obsession, but it was all I had left. And I clung to it with a desperate intensity, knowing that it was slowly destroying me. The obsession, the relentless gathering of information, the surveillance, it wasn't enough. A simmering rage demanded action, a tangible manifestation of my pain. I needed to make them pay, to disrupt their carefully constructed world, to inject chaos into their lives just as they had done to mine. But I wouldn't resort to violence, to crude acts of physical revenge. My revenge would be more subtle, more insidious, a slow poison that would eat away at their foundations. Julian, I discovered, was a rising star in the financial world, ambitious and eager to climb the corporate ladder. His career was his pride, his identity. It was also his vulnerability. I began subtly undermining him, planting seeds of doubt, exploiting his insecurities. I anonymously sent emails to his superiors, hinting at improprieties, questioning his judgment, highlighting minor errors magnified into significant failings. I created fake social media accounts, spreading rumors about his personal life, casting doubt on his integrity. I even hacked into his work computer, deleting files, altering data, creating a trail of digital breadcrumbs that led to suspicion and mistrust. The effects were slow at first, subtle shifts in the office dynamics. Whispers behind his back, questioning glances, a gradual erosion of his reputation. Then, the first tangible blow. He was passed over for a promotion, a significant setback in his carefully planned career trajectory. I watched from the shadows, a grim satisfaction growing within me as his frustration and anxiety mounted. This was just the beginning, a prelude to the symphony of destruction I was composing. Each note carefully chosen, each movement designed to maximize their pain and suffering. My revenge wouldn't be a sudden explosion. It would be a slow burn, a meticulously orchestrated downfall. Having tasted the first fruits of my revenge, a dark satisfaction bloomed within me. Julian's professional life was beginning to crumble, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the cracks spread to his personal life. But Eleonora wouldn't escape my wrath either. She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with the consequences. I turned my attention to their social circle, the friends and colleagues who had welcomed Eleonora and Julian into their fold. I began subtly sowing seeds of discord, dropping hints about their affair, revealing their secrets, exploiting their vulnerabilities. I played them against each other, creating a web of suspicion and mistrust. Dinner parties became battlegrounds, friendships fractured, and alliances shifted. The once harmonious social circle was now a viper's nest of gossip and intrigue. Eleonora, once the darling of their social set, found herself increasingly isolated. Invitations dwindled, conversations became strained, and friendships cooled. The whispers followed her wherever she went, a constant reminder of her betrayal. She had traded her old life for a new one with Julian, but now that life was turning sour. The foundation upon which they had built their relationship was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I watched their world unravel with a cold detachment. The pain they were experiencing, the isolation, the loss of trust. It was all a reflection of my own suffering. But instead of feeling empathy, I felt a perverse sense of satisfaction. They were getting what they deserved. They had made their bed, and now they had to lie in it. The web I had woven was tightening around them, slowly but surely. Their world was shrinking, their options diminishing. They were trapped in a cage of their own making, and I was the one holding the key. The symphony of their destruction was reaching its crescendo, and I was the conductor, orchestrating their downfall with a ruthless precision. My campaign of revenge was relentless, a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction. Julian, once confident and assured, was now a shadow of his former self. His career was in tatters, his reputation ruined. He had become withdrawn, irritable, prone to outbursts of anger. The stress was taking its toll, etching lines on his face, dimming the sparkle in his eyes. Eleonora, too, was showing signs of strain. The social isolation, the constant whispers, the knowledge of her betrayal, it was all weighing heavily on her. The carefree smile she once wore had been replaced by a strained expression, her eyes filled with a haunting sadness. The vibrant, confident woman I had fallen in love with was fading away, replaced by a ghost of her former self. Their relationship, once a source of strength and comfort, was now a battleground. Arguments erupted over the smallest things, fueled by resentment, insecurity, and a growing sense of mistrust. The passion that had once burned so brightly was now a flickering flame, threatened by the winds of doubt and suspicion. I watched their facade crumble with a mixture of satisfaction and a strange, unexpected sadness. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? To see them suffer, to feel the pain they had inflicted on me. But now that it was happening, it didn't bring the sense of closure I had anticipated. Instead, it left me feeling empty, hollow, like a victor in a war with no spoils. The symphony of their destruction was reaching its climax, the final movement a chaotic crescendo of pain and despair. But as the music swelled, I began to realize that I wasn't just the conductor. I was also a participant in this tragic performance. I was caught in the web I had woven, entangled in the consequences of my own actions. And as the final notes faded, I was left with a haunting question. What had I become? The downfall of Eleonora and Julian was complete. Their careers lay in ruins, their social circle had abandoned them, and their relationship was hanging by a thread. They had become pariahs, ostracized by the very people who had once embraced them. The whispers followed them wherever they went, a constant reminder of their betrayal and the consequences that followed. I had achieved my revenge, but the victory felt hollow. The satisfaction I had anticipated was replaced by a gnawing emptiness, a profound sense of loneliness. The anger that had fueled me for so long had dissipated, leaving behind a void that I couldn't fill. I had destroyed them, but in doing so, I had also destroyed myself. The obsession that had consumed me had taken its toll, leaving me isolated, emotionally drained, and spiritually bankrupt. I had become a ghost, haunting the remnants of my own life. The silence in my apartment was deafening. The walls, once covered in photographs and notes, were now bare, stripped of their obsessive decorations. The only sound was the ticking of the clock, a constant reminder of the time I had wasted, the life I had lost. I tried to reconnect with the world, to rebuild the bridges I had burned. But it was too late. My friends had moved on, their lives filled with new relationships, new experiences. My family was wary, their trust shaken by my actions. I was alone, adrift in a sea of regret and remorse. The symphony of my life had fallen silent, the music replaced by an eerie quiet. The echoes of my actions reverberated through the emptiness, a constant reminder of the path I had chosen, the price I had paid. And in the silence, I began to hear a new sound, a faint whisper that spoke of forgiveness, of redemption, of a chance to start again. The days that followed were a blur of introspection and regret. I spent hours staring out the window, watching the city go by, feeling utterly detached from the world around me. The silence in my apartment was suffocating, broken only by the occasional ringing of the phone, which I invariably ignored. I had withdrawn from everyone, isolating myself in my misery. One afternoon, a small, unassuming envelope arrived in the mail. It was addressed in familiar handwriting, a handwriting I hadn't seen in months. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized Eleonora's elegant script. With trembling hands, I tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. It wasn't an apology, nor was it a plea for forgiveness. Instead, it was a simple message of understanding. Eleonora wrote about the pain she had caused, the trust she had broken. She acknowledged the hurt she had inflicted, not just on me, but on everyone around them. She didn't make excuses for her actions, but she offered an explanation, a glimpse into the vulnerabilities and insecurities that had led her astray. She wrote about the consequences of her choices, the isolation, the loss of friendships, the damage to her career. She spoke of the regret she felt, the longing for a life that was now irretrievably lost. But she also wrote about the lessons she had learned, the strength she had found in the face of adversity, the hope she had for the future. The letter ended with a simple sentence. I understand your anger, Mark, and I accept the consequences of my actions. There was no bitterness in her words, no accusation, no plea for sympathy. just a quiet acceptance of responsibility, a recognition of the pain she had caused. As I read the letter, a wave of emotion washed over me. It wasn't anger, nor was it resentment. It was something else, something I couldn't quite define. It was a sense of release, a lifting of the burden I had been carrying for so long. Eleanora's letter was a turning point. It didn't erase the past, nor did it absolve her of her actions. But it offered a glimmer of hope, a possibility of healing, a chance to move forward. It was a quiet melody in the silence, a gentle reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility of redemption. Eleanora's letter had a profound impact on me. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, a dark cloud dispersed from my mind. Her words, devoid of self-pity or justification, resonated with a truth that I couldn't deny. She had wronged me deeply, but she was also suffering the consequences of her actions. For the first time since the discovery of her betrayal, I felt a flicker of empathy for Eleanora. I saw her not just as the woman who had broken my heart, but as a flawed human being, capable of making mistakes, of hurting others, but also of learning and growing from those mistakes. The anger that had consumed me for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet sadness. I mourned the loss of our marriage, the life we had built together, the dreams we had shared. But I also recognized that holding on to the anger, the resentment, was only hurting me. It was preventing me from healing, from moving forward. I decided to write back to Eleanora, not to rekindle our relationship, nor to offer forgiveness, but to acknowledge her letter, to let her know that I had hurt her. I wrote about my own pain, my struggles, my journey toward healing. I didn't shy away from expressing my anger and hurt, but I also acknowledged my own role in the breakdown of our marriage. Sending the letter was a cathartic experience. It was a way of releasing the pent-up emotions that had been festering inside me for so long. It was a first step toward healing, a tentative reach toward a future where the pain of the past wouldn't define me. The silence in my apartment no longer felt suffocating. It was now a space for reflection, for introspection, for healing. The echoes of the past still lingered, but they were fainter now, less intrusive. A new melody was emerging, a melody of hope, of resilience, of the possibility of a new beginning.